In today's bad argument of the day, we address the dangerous trap of the common sense fallacy and the problems with universalizing our perceptions of obviousness. Common sense does not consist of some universally held, predetermined, codified set of propositions and beliefs. From what I can tell, common sense refers to one's own initial gut reaction and whatever solutions are likely to seem obvious to someone without deep knowledge of the problem. Man, I don't know why it's so hard to just XYZ this problem. That almost never means that XYZ are as easy and correct as you think they may be. The most true part of that statement is, I don't know why it's so hard. If I find myself thinking this about a topic, that's usually a clue that I need to learn more before addressing the problem. Not that I'm some secret genius who has it all figured out. If it's obvious to me, someone has already thought of it. A good way to tell if someone is an expert or not is if they answer questions with, it's complicated instead of, it's obvious. Obviousness is not an inherent feature of a thing. It's an event which occurs internally to us. It's profoundly subjective, but we experience it as being objective to anyone who has eyes to see.
The sensation of obviousness is generated entirely by our individual experience and perspective. As pattern seekers and recognizers, obviousness occurs when we believe that we've made a connection to an existing pattern we've experienced. Things don't feel obvious unless we can relate it to something we already know about, and it feels really good to make those connections.
Our brains actually make dopamine when we recognize a pattern. The more that things feel obvious, the better we feel. This, however, is a trap. Anyone who values rationality owes it to themselves to be skeptical of things which feel obvious. Not only are things far more complex than their superficial appearance, almost as a rule, you also don't want to privilege an emotional or chemical reaction to your initial perception over actual useful information. Not only does the discovery of the obvious feel really good, things like indecision or mystery or directionlessness can cause a lot of anxiety. Relieving that anxiety can make jumping to obvious conclusions feel really satisfying.
That also presents a challenge when describing complexity to people. They've already had an extremely positive experience with their perception of obviousness and have a lifelong positive relationship with recognizing patterns of obviousness. Introducing complexity is like telling people that one of their absolute favorite things isn't good for them. And this is also part of why it's so hard to talk people out of conspiracy theories and extreme ideologies.
The appeal to common sense is an attempt to insulate against complexity and bad feelings by relying on cognitive biases that involve consensus. Consensus can be, and has been, a useful tool. It's our most primitive reality check and has done a lot of heavy lifting for humans, especially when all we needed was a superficial understanding of the material world. Complex systems and national policy, however, are far outside the scope of common sense. Reliance on universalizing obviousness and appealing to common sense sets up a house of cards in which a whole population's emotional state and even moral framework can depend on maintaining this consensus.
Just ask Galileo.
Appeals to common sense are, at best, an appeal to consensus fallacy, and the desire for a group validation of that perspective. At their worst, they're a form of sleight of hand which launders opinion into policy. Any sufficiently informed cynic understands the power of validating obviousness and how much stronger that emotional connection is than actual data when it comes to public opinion. When I hear someone appeal to common sense in a political context, I hear them saying, our collective lack of knowledge is our power, and the more of us there are, the more correct we become. It isn't just a matter of manipulation. Common sense harms the believers by foreclosing on the addition of complex truths to their analysis. This form of groupthink gaslights others and marginalizes the voices which have the most to offer the group in terms of utility, perspective, and information. Anyone who contradicts the group's notion of common sense is crazy, evil, or a heretic. But the world doesn't stay flat forever. The best thing that can happen to a group of people participating in buttressing each other's notions of common sense is to have their bubble burst, trading a temporary emotional downturn for genuinely useful tools. Tools which allow you to avoid unintended consequences and which instead generate real results.
Something is only obvious to the people who've had enough similar experiences that it fits in the pattern they expect. Common sense puts us in thought silos, banishing both differing experiences and genuine expertise.
If we're going to describe our own values as obvious, it's worth finding the difference in experience between us and those who disagree, and inviting them to partake in some of the experiences which comprise the patterns we're inclined to detect in the world. We can't use obviousness or common sense as rhetorical cudgels to shame and belabor those who've had different experiences than us. Instead, relate the values and experiences which shape your views.